Yeah, that's a good idea. Unless you want to sit here. You want to sit here? That's a good idea. Why don't we do that? You met these people the other night. So this is Kathy. This is Dominic. I so enjoyed the presentation. And this is she's the woman who writes when somebody said she was being a teacher, which she does. But that's a no.
He's not finished on his house. Because I'm not King City in my house. Listen, I made it for 40 years. I want to redo it after.
I'll look.
Unless you change the locks from my house, which is yeah, that's the end. She's asking about
Oh. So you're probably on the same. I know. You see, I don't know this person. Do you know? No, you guys. We were out last night. We went to New Orleans. Right? Here's exactly right. And there's two. Yeah, I have two. This is Donna and Marcus. I can drive like a Caribbean. I know. And from August, what a pastor. This is Vivian. This is Malcolm. His whole life and his whole passion is beautiful. Oh, and if you're interested about this, and that's happened. All right. I mean, very good. Not only
good morning. Hi. Good morning. Good to see you. You pronounce your last name? Yes. Good. I'm so glad.
well, I just found out that back to Washington. I was doing my birthday, but no, actually they're here to tell us waiting for a flight today. Tomorrow will be a
So, you need to stick around today.
no, but
All about his toes.
it was.
It'll take a while.
I know that doesn't take me a while, but it happens to be true.
Well, the truth has nothing to do with believing God. Shimon, the last one of this.
Oh, yeah, that's, yeah. Because he thinks it's the best title. Neither did I. Sit down and do it. Martin said, Tracy, I know
It's obvious that you're a teacher, and so I would shout out your
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. So nice to see all of you. As you came in, you could see there was a lot of hustle and bustle in the foyer, in the commons area. Rabbi Dadoon is leading an early morning service for young families, so she always asks me, shall I plan something like this on a day that you're doing Torah study? And my answer is, my gosh, the more things that are going on, the richer the experience for all of us. So we're here studying Torah, they're there doing services and mingling and interacting, and it just makes the whole experience rich for us. So, a couple of preliminaries. First of all, thanks to Fran and George Morris for our bagels and our live streaming this morning. See, George is looking somewhat puzzled because he signed up for it 3 months ago, and this turns out to be the day. And to Carol Marshall for picking up. And once again, I and all of us really appreciate your participation in these aspects of our wonderful Torah study group. I want to introduce a guest to us, Professor Dominic Markle, who is here and gave a lecture the other night at John Carroll, which many of us attended. And I was fortunate enough, along with Jeffrey and Doris, to have lunch with Professor Markle yesterday afternoon. We had a wonderful, robust conversation. Some of you may recall that a couple of years ago we spent our Torah study the entire year on Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic histories. We read carefully Deuteronomy, which is a foundation document text for the 6 books that follow, and then we looked very carefully at Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and at the very end we faced one of the big questions in biblical studies, and that is how to understand the ending of 2nd Kings, or the ending of that particular history. And we looked at that point at several attempts to understand it. The Martin Note theory and the von Rad theory and Frank Cross all have views about what the meaning of that ending is. And at the very end of our study, we looked at excerpts from Professor Markle's wonderful essay on the Moabite covenant and the meaning of that particular ending, which I think I'm correct to say points us back to Deuteronomy for an understanding of that phenomenon. So we're familiar with your work. Professor Markle has written voluminously on a variety of biblical topics. I must say that you're much too young to have written all those wonderful things. I hope you have some time to get out and play baseball. Baseball and Bible. We all know the connection. Yeah. Well, I won't go into it. So we're delighted to have you with us, and Doris hosted him and hosted the lunch, and thanks so much for bringing us all together. As I said to Dominic, if I may call you Dominic informally, one of the wonderful things about the world of scholarship is if you get the chance to meet in person the scholar, it adds another dimension to your appreciation of the work of that scholar. And as I said to Dominic, having had a chance to get to know him a little bit, I will now read your writings and subsequent essays with the feeling that I know the individual behind it. So this is a special treat for us. And I've said to Professor Markle that if I make any outrageous mistake this morning, that he should keep it to himself. Okay, but seriously, I mean, one wants mistakes to be corrected, so I certainly invited him to do it. Welcome to also our live streamers. We're very glad to have you. As I've mentioned, some of the handouts that we've had over the weeks are at my assistant Cindy Wilson's desk. So if you should like one of them, or if some of you did not get one when you were here or weren't here, you can always ask Cindy to download an essay for you. Okay, so characteristically, we begin with a blessing for the study of Torah. Let me just remind us quickly about the nature of that blessing. Blessings of thanks often have a tail to them. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, praised are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, which captures both divine immanence and divine transcendence. Baruch atah, you, the personal God. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, master of the universe, the transcendent God. In those introductory words is a very rich theology. Asher kitshana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who has commanded us to do, and now comes the specific thing that we're doing as a commandment. La'asok b'divrei Torah, to occupy ourselves with words of Torah. I just love the word occupy. To make Torah your occupation. And I always think about Rabbi Soloveitchik's distinction between overt and covert awareness. Right now, I am overtly aware of all of you, but I am covertly aware of my children right at this moment, even though until I said it, they weren't on my conscious mind. And when the text says to make Torah our occupation, I don't think it's demanding that we think of nothing else but Torah, but that Torah and its meaning, its aspirations, ought to be a kind of foundation for our lives. We live in the world, in the universe of Torah, even though we may not be focusing on it at any particular moment. To make Torah our occupation, our business, our vocation, rather than to think of Torah study as learning one-dimensional do's and don'ts or dogmas or doctrines. The Torah text, the Tanakh, as we know, is a very rich, multivalent text, which is often in conversation with itself as we are in conversation with Torah. So, let's begin with the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign in the universe, who sanctifies us with God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so this year we are following the Luach, the calendar of Parshiot, the Torah portions of the week. In the weeks that during which we had a beginning but hadn't reached Genesis yet, we looked at the very last chapters of Deuteronomy. And as we noticed, some of those Torah portions are only one chapter long. I think of this as a kind of analogy to a retard in music, where we, near the end, slow down so as to give emphasis to the climax, the culmination. And that's what the Torah does. Chapter 32 is a one-chapter Torah portion. 33, 34. 34 is short, is a one-chapter. Nitzavim, I believe, is a chapter and a half. So the rabbis, in their wisdom, compressed Torah portions, I wouldn't want to say consistently throughout, but certainly near the end we see this slowing down. This is to be contrasted with the beginning. The beginning, two Torah portions get us already to Genesis chapter 12. So last week's portion, Bereshit, chapters 1 through the middle of 6. And then today's Torah portion, this week's Noach, the middle of 6 through 11. So it raises the unanswerable question, I guess, maybe somebody has the answer, as why it is that our sages rushed through the first 11 chapters of the Bible. And I think one plausible answer is, maybe it's a compelling answer, is that it wants to get to Abraham, which is, after all, the beginning of the story of a particular people. So let me pose the issue in the following way. The call of Abraham is the answer to a question. Had the Torah begun with Abraham, we wouldn't be asking why after 11 chapters do we get to Abraham. If it's the story of a particular people, why don't we just start with Abraham? So I'm posing it like this, that Abraham is an answer to the question raised by the first 11 chapters. In other words, the call of Abraham is a response to the realities detailed in the first 11 chapters. And we might ask, and then begin to look again at, what are those realities? I would say those realities have three components, just off the top of my head. I'll probably disagree with myself while I'm saying it. Who is God? What does it mean to be human? What kind of world do we live in so that God's will and human possibilities can be expounded upon? So the question has something to do with who is God, what kind of world do we live in, who are we in combination. And I want to suggest that these 11 chapters outline both rich possibilities inherent in our human situation in the context of a transcendent God and a knowable world, possibilities and problems. Problems arise. In other words, these 11 chapters detail a variety of problems, but they also detail a variety of possibilities. And at the end of chapter 11, we run into a family on their way to the land of Canaan, stalled, and then out of the blue, God calls Abraham. It's a journey based on, we could infer, economic, cultural issues, a migration. Why are they migrating? The Torah doesn't tell us. But on the way of a journey generated by particular realities, something brand new happens. The meaning of that journey is transformed by God's call. So the journey of Terah, Abraham's father, and Abraham's family can be a microcosm of the journey on which Abraham and subsequent generations are embarking on through the Torah. Okay? So what I'd like to do is, we looked last week at the first chapters of Genesis. I want to review those quickly and then move on with some highlights of the chapters ending at the end of chapter 11. So we looked at chapter 1 and 2 of Genesis. Let me say, perhaps as an exaggeration, chapter 1 of Genesis presents an ideal world. The world is orderly, it's purposeful, the unfolding of creation is hierarchical. Leo Strauss, who I mention often and love, has an essay, Introduction to Genesis, in which he points out the hierarchy in terms of motion. The sun, the moon, the stars move in their courses. The animals move from course to course, move around in a way that the sun, the moon, the stars don't, but through instinct. Human beings move around too as the result of consciousness and plans. So if we just look at the hierarchy of motion, plants grow in place. Stars and the sun move around. Animals move around not predictably. We move around not predictably, though as the product of awareness and motivation. So that I think is a good example of the hierarchical nature of the creation story. So we have order, we have hierarchy, we have blessing. I might call it original blessing. Before human beings begin to toy with creation, there is original blessing. And we see it in chapters 5 and 11, whose manifestation is the succession of the generations, genealogies. Genealogies, the so-called begats, often seem to us as parts of the Bible that we can pass over quickly. But there's something very powerful about that. The predictability of the succession of generations, original blessing, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and lo and behold, they do. So this is a kind of obedience to divine blessing, where human beings play their role in continuing to produce the generations. We have penultimately in the creation story, the creation of human beings who are made in the image of God. Male and female, God created them. So Adam here is not man, but humankind. We don't get the differentiation between man and woman until the end of chapter 3, when Adam is looking for a helpmeet, and God tells him to name the animals, and we'll look at that in a little more detail in a minute. And he finds no helpmeet for him in the naming of the animals until Eve comes. Out of Ish comes an Isha. And it's only there that we have the differentiation among the sexes. Now, of course, we have it in chapter 2 with Adam and Eve. But at the beginning in chapter 1, God created male and female, created he them. Human beings made in the image of God. And I've suggested that one of the implications of this, because we want to ask, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? And it seems to me a plausible answer is, let's see how God acts in Genesis 1, on the basis of which we find what our endowments are. To create with words, let there be light. Sticks and stones shall break my bones, but names can never hurt me. No false statement more than this has ever been made. Language is powerful. God creates through language. We have the capacity to create or to destroy through language. We can bless, we can order. God tells us to be fruitful, fill the earth, and subdue it. Technological human beings who have the endowment of reason, of being able to understand the world, and in a way to shape it, to transform it via technology to our own, for our own needs. So human beings are given a great endowment of attributes at the beginning. Of course, this is only the penultimate creation. The final thing created is Shabbat. And as we pointed out last week, Shabbat has nothing to do with either the cycles of nature, as so many holidays do, or the course of history. Hanukkah, Purim, these are related to historical events. Sukkot, Shavuot, these are related to the cycles of nature. Shabbat is neither grounded in nature nor in history. It's God's day and features our relationship to God. So we are subordinated at the very end to Shabbat and the God who calls us into relationship. So human beings are vastly endowed, but in a universe featuring a transcendent God, human beings cannot be the acme of creation, the acme of the world, the height of the world. This is something that at the end of the end of this introductory history with the Tower of Babel, the Babylonites confuse. They want to make themselves a name, and God is worried about, I take it, hubris, that we're going to exceed what it is that's possible and plausible for human beings. Okay? So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 puts human beings in a garden. If our mandate in chapter 1 is to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, in chapter 2 it's l'shamra ul'avda, la'avda ul'shamra, something like that. To tend the garden, to work the garden, to serve the garden, and to maintain it. So we might say, and here I'm just mimicking what Joseph Soloveitchik says, Adam 1, the Adam of chapter 1, moves forward with our creative charisma. Adam 2, the Adam of the second chapter, steps back and serves and recognizes something that Adam 1 never had to face: loneliness. Adam 1, the Adam of chapter 1, is created with his mate. Adam 2 is created alone, and that becomes a problem for which a mate then is produced. In Soloveitchik's great article, which some of you have read, The Lonely Man of Faith, looks at especially Adam 2 in his loneliness, which creates a problem. What are the antidotes? What are the resources that can help us emerge from our loneliness? And Soloveitchik has a long discussion about that. So chapter 1 and chapter 2, I might say, produce something idyllic. So if I want to ask myself in my own day, how can I produce an idyllic situation for us human beings? How can I produce something that has the features of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? What do I know? Let me give you an analogy before I try to answer that question. If somebody were to give me a mathematics problem to solve, and I work on it, and I can't make any progress, before I spend too much time on it, I'd like to know, has anybody solved this problem? In other words, if somebody asks me to draw a four-sided triangle, and I get to work on it, and I notice I can't draw a four-sided triangle, wouldn't it be useful for me at some point to stop and ask, is it drawable? Has anybody done it? And if the answer is no, then for all I know, it can't be done. If I want to create an idyllic situation for human beings, I might want to ask, given the course of history and all of its tragedy and backsliding, is it possible? Can I do it? One of the turns in modern political philosophy is Machiavelli's idea that the search for Plato's ideas, the search for something wonderful and good, virtue is not the essence of statecraft. The essence of statecraft is the struggle for power. And so Machiavelli is suggesting that the ideals of ancient political philosophy are unrealizable. Is an idyllic situation possible for human beings? And here's my answer. Here's the Bible's answer, I think. Yes, it's possible because it has already existed. In other words, I think one of the concomitants of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 is that our universe supports the possibility of Eden. And therefore, it's worth striving for because it has already existed. So I think the Bible at the very beginning suggests that an ideal is possible. And as I said last night in my Devar Torah, I think that much of biblical literature is the search for Eden. Either a return literally to Eden or a kind of substitute Eden. The land of Israel, I think, functions in the Torah as a kind of Edenic existence, the land of milk and honey. And lo and behold, when they finally got there, they realized that Eden was still ahead of them. As the prophets pointed out, Eden is a society filled with justice and compassion and the dignity of human beings. So Eden slips away as we think we've gotten it. But the Torah is a search, I think, for Eden, which, once Adam and Eve leave Eden, still exists. So I think there's great power in this initial vision that we find in Genesis 1 and 2. So let's take a look now at chapter 3 and try to work our way to the end of chapter 11. So right away in chapter 3, now the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that the Lord God had made. Okay? He said to the woman, "Did God really say you shall not eat from any tree of the garden?" So, what do we have here? It looks like we have temptation. And Adam and Eve both succumb. So that temptation, I'm just thinking in a way psychologically and ontologically. Psychologically, we are subject to temptation, felicitous or infelicitous. But also, since it's represented by the serpent, it would seem to be a part of the world that God has made. In other words, we, by definition, can be led astray, both by the nature of things and by who we are. Okay, so did God really say, "You shall not eat of any tree of the garden"? The woman replied, and so on, and they have this discussion. Verse 6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes. What's significant? What do you think is significant about that particular phrase? What human faculty is focused on here? Seeing. So, seeing can lead us astray. And seeing becomes the organ which the later biblical authors are worried about. Not the sight of our eyes, but what we hear. Shema Yisrael. Hear, heed, O Israel. This, I think, is already a foreshadowing of the very notion of commandment, which appeals to our minds through hearing and not through seeing. Seeing can lead us astray. What I think is interesting about this is, look, we're created with eyes to see. The fact that we have eyes is not something that we created for ourselves. So human nature has as one of its aspects eyes that can lead us astray. We are led astray by our faculties, which can also lead us down the right path. So human nature, don't you think human nature is seen here as mixed? Capacities for, let's say, obedience and capacities for disobedience. Free will, I think, is presupposed here. We have the capacity to choose. Okay, so, and what happens here in chapter 3 is through disobedience, here's how I want to put it. 4 kinds of alienation are the outcome. Human beings are alienated from animals. It shall bite your heel and you shall step on its head. Man is alienated from woman. There will be increased pain in childbirth, yet your desire shall be for your husband. There's an alienation of human beings from the earth. Before this disobedience, human beings could just go to the trees and pick their fruit. Now we earn our bread by the sweat of our brow. Okay? So nature does not easily produce the yield for us. We have to now labor for it. And also man from God. Human beings are expelled from the Garden of Eden. So that the result here is, on the one hand, the conditions in which we now live outside of Eden. But there's also something seductive about this. Since an alienation is an action which undermines an original coming together, we might think that a return to Eden, now metaphorically, might be to repair those alienations. So the Torah here is both suggesting elements of our reality as well as a kind of agenda for perfecting the human condition. How can we regain some intimacy with the earth? Man with woman, human beings and animals, human beings and God. Maya?
Just back to the text, I find it very interesting that it says, let me see, that she says, Kitov.
Where are you? What verse?
That's what I'm trying to say.
The serpent, verse 4?
Yeah, 6.
6?
Yeah. ותראה האישה כי טוב העץ למאכל. It's the same words that God says, וירא אלוהים כי טוב. So it's kind of puzzling.
Well, that's good. I like that. You see what Maya is saying? God saw that it was good, ki tov. Here, she sees that it is good, ki tov. What do you make of that, Maya?
What do you make of it?
I have a different question.
Here's the way to deal with this. If you don't know the answer, turn to your neighbor.
I have a question which may actually relate to this. She only can discern this. Let me put it differently. What kind of ideal is Eden if you can only stay there without knowledge of good and evil? That is, they're in Eden, but they're ignorant. You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, otherwise you'll be kicked out.
Yes.
So if we aspire to return to Eden, aren't we aspiring, I'm being a little...
No, you're not.
To ignorance.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want that.
So that raises a very good question, because it strikes me that a presupposition for being able to obey or disobey is both free will and some discernment. So that, and look, human beings have the discernment, Adam, to name the animals. The naming of the animals is very, I think, a profound way of saying that. Because when Adam or Ish, looks at a beast, a behemah, what Adam might be understood as knowing is, the names of the beasts on the assumption that names are not merely contingent, but they point to essence. When I go to a conference and I have a name badge that says Roger, Roger has nothing to do with my essence, just happens to be the name my mother gave me. But what does Adam know when he tries to name the animals and see whether they're helpmeets? Here's my guess. I don't know that there's great evidence for this, but since he comes to know that Eve is his appropriate helpmeet, in the similarity between Ish and Isha, names and essences, Adam, if I'm right about this, already knows something significant about the essence of the various animals. So my response, just a speculative response, is that it's not that before eating from the tree of knowledge they knew nothing. It's just eating from the tree of knowledge gave them a knowledge which they weren't supposed to have. It's a traducing of boundaries. Because they have to have had some knowledge already to be able to understand the difference between good and evil and to have the free will to enact it. You don't look like you fully embraced this
I don't
point.
fully embrace it because you can say they had some knowledge, but is it enough knowledge?
That's a good question. Yeah. The people at the Tower of Babel are searching for something which transcends the rightfulness of the limits of human beings. So there is this question of boundaries. I want to suggest that it also exists here, but I don't know how to answer your question. Yeah. Michael?
Well, I was thinking that when you said that notion that we aspire to go back to Eden, and Jeffrey and Maya pointed out, why would we aspire to that? Eve practically gave a little Devar Torah there, saying, well, we've been instructed, tells us things, we've been instructed not to do this, so what we're aspiring to return to perhaps is a time where we know much, but we don't have the presumption that we know everything. And that's, in other words, to a time of pre-alienation, when a man wasn't alienated from a woman. I mean, she made this decision without consulting the other human being, right? When we weren't alienated from nature and the world around us, when we're able to contemplate the world around us, but not assume we know everything about it. Thus, we're still in touch with awe, and we still have a relationship with God.
No.
So what we're returning to there is actually somewhat an aspirational utopian environment to some extent, assuming that it's not even desirable to know everything, because that would almost be the end of knowledge.
To know everything means nothing more to know, and therefore, is that your point?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I like your point, though, about some kind of a relationship with God. God creates human beings in chapter 1 in a way, in a very austere way. Let us make human beings in our image. In chapter 2, it's very personal. God breathes into the man the breath of life. I mean, God is right up there, almost kissing Noah. Once again, we have chapter 1, the transcendent God, chapter 2, the immanent God. So there is a kind of theology at work here too, elusively through a very difficult text, so many problems. Malcolm, did you have a question, comment?
I think as a plot device.
Say that again?
As a plot device.
Yes.
This is essential. If this event between the serpent and Eve doesn't happen, there's no more story. Man and woman and all the animals live in perfect harmony in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
But that's not the world we live in.
I think that's a great point. And therefore, that's a necessary move in the narrative. If the author is going to try to get as close as possible to our situation. I like that. I like that. I like that. That's the power of story, isn't it? Characters and plot, so that we can see ourselves in the abstractions of a philosopher. Some philosophers are hard for us to relate to oftentimes. I mean, maybe we can understand it and see the wisdom, but if you have a story, then it's about us, maybe. Yeah.
2 quick points. In the first chapter of Genesis, we see the creation of the physical world.
Yes.
Are we not seeing here the creation of consciousness? Okay, that thing that we're beginning to understand that we are different because of this particular consciousness. Second point, in search for Eden, in our alienation, isn't that what the Christians are creating by having heaven, where everything is resolved? We go back to the point of the idyllic Eden within the eternal life, but we have to finish taking our consciousness through the physical plane.
Yes.
In order to return to Eden.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
It's our pilgrim's progress back home again.
So I think you're making a couple of very excellent points. I mean, we seem to be consciousness is presupposed in the creation of human beings who are able to subdue the earth, that we need to make plans, create tools, have purposes. It's not said explicitly, but I think it's implicit, or I might put it this way. It's one of the necessary conditions for the possibility of subduing the earth. Sort of a Kantian argument, who's interested in necessary conditions. What are the conditions for the very possibility of something? And consciousness, I think, is presupposed. I like your point about heaven. I mean, it's another alternative to the search for Eden, isn't it? I mean, here's something after death. Yeah. What do I love about it? That it captures our need for, I don't know how to say this. It captures our need for, I don't know, return strikes me as too specific, for some resolution.
Would it be redemption to get back in? So if I live a good life, I, through this physical plane, find my redemption. That redemption allows me to go back to Eden.
Okay, very good. And it gives rhyme and reason to how to live a life. Therefore, I need to live life in a certain way. Yeah, I mean, there are two questions. One is there such a thing as heaven and life after death? That's a question. Another question is, what is the function of the idea of life after death? In a certain way, the pragmatics of a certain belief, irrespective of its reality in the real world. And I think you're pointing this out. It's another way of, I think the Tanakh in general is searching for Eden on the plane of history, continuous with the world that we know, though maybe it's, in a way, it's perfection. It's more interested in the horizontal than it is in the vertical. That's a choice of the biblical author. Jim?
But excuse me, when Eve's told not to do something, we have this same returning situation throughout, especially in the rules. We have all these rules. Don't do this, don't do that. And you know full well if you tell a child, or probably anybody else, whatever you do, don't do that. You know the person's going to do it. Because why else would you say it? So, if God didn't think, or the serpent or anybody else thought she wasn't going to, might not do it, they're going to say don't do it.
psychological.
It's a recurring theme through this whole book, especially with the list of rules of things we just don't do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Because you know that in our own, God's created us with the instinct to do it. So somebody's got to tell us not to.
yeah, yeah, right, right, right. I mean, it really points to one of our questions. What are we left with at the end of chapter 11, for which the call of Abraham is the beginning of the answer? Is it Rashi who says about the word Bereshit in the beginning, or the beginning of? And I think Rashi's interpretation is with Reshit. And Reshit, I think, in Proverbs is wisdom. With wisdom did God create the heavens and the earth. What is wisdom? Torah is wisdom. So that Rashi is suggesting something quite seductive, that Torah is already on the mind of the author 70 chapters before Torah emerges. I mean, Torah doesn't emerge till Exodus 20, 50 chapters of Genesis, 20 chapters of Exodus. And yet, I think what you're pointing to here is the intimations of the elements of the answer as the problems are exposed and displayed. Yeah, right. Russell.
Yeah, so I think if we change the metaphor from society and history to personal development, consciousness, psychological development, the 7 stages of man, everybody grows up from being people who are lucky enough to have a good home life to be growing up in Eden, and everybody bites their own apple because as you develop, you get knowledge, and you see the world is not that way, and you're always dealing with a imperfect world with temptations, with failings, and there's no way to get back to that innocence of childhood anymore.
Yeah. So I like that. Russell is suggesting a developmental understanding of these stories. Yeah, both of the individual and of the species. Yeah. One of the things that, who is this? Richard Elliott Friedman, I think, in one of his later books, talks about the progressive, I'm not saying this right, that God becomes more and more remote to the action as the story moves on. God is everywhere present in Genesis and Exodus. He helps the matriarchs name the children. Of course, he's absent explicitly from the Joseph story, but as Joseph points out, this was God's plan all along. It's just that we thought we were doing it on our own, which they were, but God is there. Then Exodus is the book of miracles. So God is very present at the beginning. When you get to the book of Daniel, God is referred to as the Ancient of Days. God is no longer involved in the activities, but he is believed in. And one could use the model, I've heard myself say this recently, maybe it was here last week, that it's also, in terms of the development of a child, the parent, we need our parents very proximately in our lives. And as we grow up, the ideal is that we don't need them to be as involved as we attain our own independence. So there is this developmental idea also in the arc of the biblical narrative. Yeah, Stuart.
I think the chapter 3 especially is so full of holes for discussion purposes. For example, the woman replied to the serpent. She knows of this only because of something that you assume. There's nothing provided in the Bible to indicate her knowledge of the tree of good and evil.
Right, right.
By the way, who performed the marriage ceremony? The man and his wife are defined in the chapter 3. And yet there's no person.
All right. Rabbi.
Yes.
See me after. No, Stuart's making an awfully good point too. Let me make two suggestions.
Okay.
One is, this is the nature of narrative. Narrative always leaves things out. It can't say everything. So the author, the issue is what, right, who is it? Frank Kermode, I think, in The Genesis of Secrecy, perhaps, says that narrative, by definition, always begets more narrative.
Yeah.
There are always holes to be filled in. So you can't expect an author to answer every possible question, to fill in every possible blank. Because the author is up to something and doesn't stop to fill in all the blanks. How about that for an answer?
It was a comment, not a question.
Very good. Yeah. So that's right. Yeah. We have that question about the animals in the flood, don't we? How come the animals are destroyed as well? What did they do wrong? Well, look, the author is not interested in that question, and so moves right along to what the author's interested in. We readers, I think this is also one of the functions of narratives,
Sure.
is draws us in as we try to make sense of the narrative, which is always underwritten. Gary.
Well, this wonderful discussion, very interesting discussion, raises the question in my mind of whether Genesis 1 and 2, are they complementary or are they contradictory?
Yeah, very good.
And the question really is, what's the function of having two specific chapters?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. Well, there are two great answers to that question, it seems to me. One is the documentary hypothesis. Okay, so chapter 1 is Elohim. Yeah, chapter 2 is Adonai. Chapter 1 is written either by E or P. Chapter 2, Adonai Elohim's got to be written, plus other aspects of it. God is very far in chapter 1. God is very near in chapter 2. So one answer is these are two different sources which some editor, either knowingly or unknowingly, put them together. The other answer is Soloveitchik's answer, and that is the twofoldness of chapter 1 and 2 reflect the twofoldness of the human condition. Yeah. We are masters, we're scientists, we're craftspeople, we subdue the earth. The lights are on here, the microphone is working. How does it, this microphone is not the creation of Adam 2. Adam 2 is tending the garden, serving it. Adam 1 built this microphone through science and technology. So, chapter 1, we in our assertiveness, in our capacity to understand and to bend nature to our will, which is not all that we are. We're also needy, we're lonely, we need companionship, we need a personal God, we need a way to relate to a personal God. What does Adam 1 do Friday night? Does he come to services? No. He's reading Newton's science. Adam 2 is at services. Adam 2 has God very close. recognizes the power of his relationship with God, and is very needy. So when Cantor Sebo sings a beautiful song, Adam 1 is looking at his watch.
World Series.
When is this going to be over? Adam 2 is grooving on it. Sing another. So those are, I think, two very possible answers to the question. I think Soloveitchik would say that the editor had the genius of putting those two creation stories from different sources together in order to point out the complementarity of two aspects of the human condition. At the end of Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible, the chapter is something like, no longer the world that made the Bible, how the sources were put together, but the world the Bible made. So the world the Bible made is the work of the editor, of the redactor, many redactors, I take it. Now, Franz Rosenzweig, the great Jewish theologian, says that R should not be named the redactor, but Rabbeinu, our rabbi, who had the great genius of knowing how to put those sources together. Yeah. Yes, Harry. I know it was an R.
I find it interesting in chapter 3 that warnings are given against the misuse or overuse of knowledge. First, in the case of the serpent, who is supposed to be a very clever, the cleverest of all animals, obviously here he's doing something bad.
He's what now?
He's doing something bad.
Yeah.
He is trying to tempt Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge. And the other is, there are many trees in Eden. There are probably trees of beautiful fruit and whatnot, but this one is the tree of knowledge. And that's the one that you're not supposed to eat the fruit of. So again, a misuse or overuse, wrongful use of knowledge.
Yeah, it's a good...
Isn't that really the basis on which much of human behavior is either praised or condemned?
Knowledge is either praised as something wonderful or condemned. Yeah, and that's back to Jeffrey's question about what's wrong with knowledge. I mean, why aren't we supposed to have knowledge? And my answer is, again, it's just an attempt to put it together. I don't know if it holds water. Is that it can't be and isn't knowledge per se, but the kind of knowledge, storming the heavens, knowing that the secret things belong to God, the revealed things belong to us, I think said somewhere in 1 or 2 Samuel. There are limits to knowledge, though knowledge is good.
But you can misuse the knowledge.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So knowledge is good, but even the legitimate knowledge can be misused. We built the bomb. Yeah, and we cut down the forests, which we need the trees, I guess, but we don't need every tree, or we have to preserve, and so on. Yeah. No, I think that's good. And so right there in that myth, that story, is something very fundamental about the human condition. Knowledge is good, but knowledge is problematic. If only they had eaten the tree of life. But that would have been the end of the story. They ate the tree of life, now let's go out and play ball.
The hierarchy consists of 4 steps. There's data to begin with. Information is what you gather from data. Knowledge is what you gain from information.
Yes.
And wisdom is what you gain from knowledge. And I think the cross there is between knowledge and wisdom.
That's nice.
That's a bit question.
That's a nice hierarchy. If only we had a definition of wisdom. Putting the knowledge together, I don't know. Okay. Yeah. La'asok b'divrei Torah. To make Torah our business. That's what we're doing right here, aren't we? We're really thinking through some of these big issues for ourselves. Let's look at chapter 4. I'd hoped to get through chapter 11, but I keep hoping. Okay, so chapter 4. Now they're out of the garden. So now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord. I feel that statement by Cain is a mistranslation, an over-translation of the text. Kaniti ish et Adonai. I don't think the word help is there. I like to think of it as the arrogance of Eve in doing what God does. God created human beings. I create a human being. I've purchased a man. I've gotten a human being along with God. God and I are partners in this. So I want to suggest, to me this is a tantalizing idea. The arrogance, the pride that can emerge in the family with the power of procreation. In a way, it's another kind of temptation, necessary, wonderful, but it also can lead to a problem. Okay? So let's go on here. She then bore his brother Abel. Abel became a keeper of sheep. Cain became a tiller of the soil. So, right away, this story could be understood in terms of two kinds of vocation. The sedentary life, tiller of the soil, and the nomadic life. The Torah has suspicions about the city, because the city is the product of human initiative and drive, which can eliminate God from its environment. Look what we created. So something about the sedentary life can lead to an excessive sense of who we are and what we can do. Whereas if you're nomad, you're dependent upon nature and upon the seasons and the elements, and therefore much more ready to acknowledge our littleness and the need for gifts, as opposed to building skyscrapers, which is not about God at all, but about our endowment, our charisma to create the urban environment. You wonder whether something like that isn't involved here. It's a big inference from just a statement. Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of soil. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil, and Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. Okay, so what are we to make of this? Well, let's go on. The Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. So the first thing to say is that seems pretty cruel of God. After all, Cain is bringing an offering too. I think one of the implications here is that, let's put it this way, religion comes naturally to human beings. They are, with their bounty, making an offering. They were never asked to do it. They're not asked to do it here. They do it spontaneously. I think there's an assertion here that human beings have the natural impulse to engage in religion. Here, sacrifice. Here, a gesture of thanksgiving. They don't have to be commanded to do it. Okay? Look at the end of chapter 4. Very last verse. And to Seth, in turn, a son was born, and he named him Enosh. It was then that men began to invoke the Lord by name. Once again, religion is coming naturally to these people. Okay? So that seems to me part of the Bible's anthropology. Who are we? We recognize something, our neediness, our gratitude for the things we didn't create for ourselves. By the way, curiously, the word Adonai is used for God here, which is God's personal name. You know, in the story of Moses, it's that God revealed his personal name only then to Moses. But here it's used long before Abraham and Abraham's descendants. I don't get it unless it's an accident. So what do you make? Verse 3 here. Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil, and Abel of Israel brought the choicest. The Lord paid heed to Abel in his offering, but to Cain in his offering he paid no heed. Any thoughts about it? Ellen?
Maybe God is a vegetarian.
If you find any evidence for that. Okay.
Was it that God felt
That what?
Was it that God felt that he had created the animals, and therefore what Cain was bringing him was his own that he had developed, as opposed to fruits of the land which Abel grew?
Huh. And therefore what? That he prefers the animal to the...
Well, maybe that he himself had created those animals, and Abel had created out of the earth.
I see what you're saying. But he accepts the animals which he created. I thought the logic was, those animals are mine, don't bring them.
Well,
And therefore, why would he accept Abel's offering?
Because Abel actually grew it with his own hands.
Oh, okay. Possible. Russell?
So I see a difference of intention, because Cain just brought fruit from the soil, but Abel brought the choice firstlings. So there's more intention, there's more devotion, and because he's more, because the person is making the choice, then God is also reflecting that choice.
In God's choice.
Yes.
So Russell, I think, is pointing to something very interesting. There is inwardness involved in Abel's offering. He's thought, my gosh, this is the best of what I have. Then I like that. So that if worship comes naturally, the best kind of worship is where we're both uttering the words or having the thoughts and also meaning it in some way. And to give up what's best is a real sacrifice. You know, I mean, when we were kids and we wanted to give our friend a toy, we didn't give the friend our best toy. That's Abel. We give them the one that we're not interested in. I mean, I'm trying to be a little bit funny here, but that to give away the choicest is already to give something of oneself away, which I think is a mirror of the inwardness. Jeffrey, do you have a comment?
I had the same point.
Okay, good. Stuart?
Afterwards, Cain founded a city and named the city after his son Enoch. So Cain already is known as a city dweller.
Yes. Which follows the sedentary nature of being tiller of the soil. Because after all, I mean, what happens for tillers of the soil? If you're lucky, you produce surplus. Now you have to do something with the surplus, which begins to require organization. And pretty soon you're building a complex community to handle the surplus that is yielded here. So being a city builder follows, in a way, from the sedentary quality of his life.
Of
Yeah.
course, who is to say what the populace of the city is comprised of?
Right, right, in its complexity. Malcolm?
It seems even in this story there is a contest that's created between these two brothers, relatively simply, but perhaps God knows something about the difference between Cain and Abel, or God is testing Cain, because what we see follows this very shortly.
Yes.
Reveals something about the character of these two brothers. So we have a story that's immediately, very rapidly setting up a contrast between these are both children of the first man and woman.
Right.
And yet, here is much different behavior.
Yeah, between the two of them.
Yeah.
And we know how our kids differ from same parents, same environment, often differ from one another. Did you want to make something of that? I mean, are you talking about inherent difference or the family problems, or this is the first family and it eventuates in murder? The first act after the expulsion from Eden, or one of the first acts, is not only murder, it's fratricide. It's brother killing brother, which is an astonishing assertion by the biblical author. So think of Eden as a prehistory where timelessness is possible. Time enters the picture, and with time, history. And the first act of history is murder. So that's an astonishing statement by the author, extremely pessimistic, isn't it? That our natural condition, well, Hobbes got to it, right? The war of all against all. Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Therefore, we need, in a way, Hobbes gets at part of the logic here. We need a social contract. We need a way to agree with one another that we're not going to kill each other. And the Bible has the same kind of initial, is it true to say, a pessimism? A pessimism about a life that is untutored. Human beings in its natural situation is going to run aground. Which begins to be an argument for Torah, doesn't it? Jim?
It's a short leap to Nietzsche from here.
Short leap to Nietzsche, yeah.
But it also shows that God can create and man can destroy.
Yeah.
Everything going on here, God somehow created, at least that's the way I feel.
Yeah.
And the only thing we're capable of is destroying it. I'm in construction. It's much harder to put the building up than to tear it down.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of the thing.
But God also creates, doesn't he? God creates.
That's what I'm saying.
God creates and we destroy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But God does, okay, well, I'm taking it to the next step. But God, even though we destroy God's world, God keeps going with the enterprise. God never gives up, which is, Kathy.
Are we seeing the germ of the story that will go throughout the entire Bible? And that germ is the idea of the choices of the flock, the chosen people. And that if you sacrifice the chosen people, there's retribution for it. We're beginning to introduce into the narrative this idea of better chosen, the best of the flock, and that there are ramifications for hurting or destroying the chosen of the flock. It's just like the beginning of a germ of an idea that sits there, and then it develops out all through the rest of the Bible.
Well, it certainly isn't it true that choice is pervasive. I mean, that's what drives the narrative, choices. You seem to be making a leap to the chosen
Well,
people.
choiceless of the firstlings of his flock.
Yes.
That sounds an awful lot about how we define the beloved of God.
Yes.
We're the flock. I mean, and it goes on even into the New Testament of Jesus being the shepherd of the flock. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it just seems like a germ of an idea that's going to then begin to play out.
So it's an interesting point because Abraham is chosen by God, and one could say that's the germ of the chosen people. But what is Abraham called for? Through you shall all the peoples of the earth be blessed. So Abraham's being chosen is chosen as an instrument and not as an inherent good to be celebrated for itself alone. I mean, after all, one of the implications of the first 11 chapters of the Bible is that God is concerned with humanity. And humanity has run aground in these 11 chapters. And so God calls Abraham. Why? Two possibilities at least. To get a people that can be kind of off the stage of history and lead an idyllic life in relationship to God. That's not what happens. Abraham is called to be an instrument for a higher purpose. And the higher purpose is the reversal of the alienations that come in the first 11 chapters. In other words, God remains a universalist, even though the story turns particularist. You remember that passage in Amos chapter 3 where God says, I didn't choose you to have special privileges, but for responsibility. You're here to do good, and therefore I'm going to punish you all the more than the others because I chose you, which is now a burden. So, right. It's another function. I mean, the story could have started with Abraham, as I said at the beginning this morning. Then it would have been a particularistic narrative. But it's not a particularistic narrative. The particularism is, maybe I'm overstating it here, because 90% of the narrative is particularistic, I might say, in the context of something larger. But still, when Abraham, who sets the whole story in its second act, so to speak, in motion, it's for being a blessing to others. Vivian?
Back to story, what I see in this chapter is another exile.
Yeah.
Cain is exiled from the soil, and that sets the motion again. I mean, if this is a journey, people have to move, and people have to change, and cities need to be built, and then, so I think that's, I just think this, is, as I say, part of the motion of the journey.
And what is the part you're pointing to? Exile?
Yes. Exile.
It's the second exile, isn't it? The banishment from Eden.
And we'll see many more.
And we'll see many more, right. Which I think has suggested to scholars, I'm not sure how cogent this is, that maybe these stories were put together in the exile. This is about the exilic situation that human beings, it's part of the ontological reality of human beings. Exile, home and away. Yeah. Well, chapter 11 didn't happen. Yeah, okay. Why don't we think about next week? We're going to start with chapter 11. I have the same plan every week, and it's never worked. We'll start with chapter 11, then we'll make a pass to Abraham. Also, the next Torah portion is another 6 chapters, 12 through 17. So, thank you so much. We're so good.
May I say
please.
Thank you? So since I was so kindly introduced, I would like to say thank you. for your hospitality. And two words came to mind as I was watching this, because I came to learn. You are, I think, extremely blessed to have a wonderful Torah teacher. But what is it, was my question, that makes a Torah teacher wonderful? I think a good teacher is an example of the love for wisdom. And but it's not about the teacher's love for wisdom, but that it inspires the love for wisdom for everybody. And that made me think of Philo of Alexandria, who was Jew around the time of Jesus. I think, but funnily, he was received more by Christians than by Jews through history. But Philo was a great philosopher, Aristotle and so on, Plato, and put Judaism, Torah, into the language of philosophy, saying Jews are the real people of philosophers, more than the Greeks. And I find that in the spirit of this conversation. The other term that came to mind is I think a more Christian one, that is the term inspiration. Because Christians have come to think that these words, the Bible, are inspired words, inspired by God. But inspiration is not just what comes out of the text, but it happens in a community that is trying to understand the text, and that's what I felt I am experiencing here. Thank you so much for your kind hospitality.
Thank you so much. Yeah, next time when you say these things, don't say them in my presence. Thank you so much. Those were wonderful words. Come back. You're going to Munich this afternoon. Get a round-trip ticket. Next week, we're going to do this some more. But I hope our paths will cross some more. Thank you so much. A pleasure to get to know you, and I really am touched by your words. Shabbat Shalom. Oh, okay, I wondered. That happens to me all the time. The author is going to be because we often ask ourselves, what about X? What about, where did the boys get those lives? This is a conundrum. It leaves a hole. Well, it's the same question about Ruth's conversion. Joining up of support, joins the family and now if you were to push the father was so she was leaving something powerful as well. It was a conversion of the spirit. Yeah. More than you now. Went to his editor and said, I want to write a couple of columns on my 10 favorite composers. It was orders. That's what this is too. I love it.
Okay.
You guys going to join us Wednesday night for Opera Yes, some nights. Thank you so much.
That was truly wonderful. Another thank you. It was a blessing for me.
So many questions. When I was teaching at the university, I started to write evaluation. They always say, wonderful questions. No answers. Wesleyan.
What was your subject?
Well, I had a degree in philosophy, so I taught philosophy, I taught Jewish studies, I taught general and religious studies.
Beautiful. Well, what's the breadth of your variety?
There's so much to know. It's a joy. I do poetry. I just sit back and, famously, Strauss, who was also a conductor, and sometimes, just step back and let the thing grow. You do a lot of teaching yourself?
Yes. I mean, it's not so many courses, it's maybe 3 per year, but doctoral students, but it's an art that one needs to continue to learn, but one sees the experience of many years.
You love teaching?
Oh, yes.
Scholar, you're teaching, they feed each other, don't they?
Oh, yes.
But teaching also generates. Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yes, I mean, it's beautiful in Rome because I have only postgraduate students, so they really, they do what you do, they read scholarship immediately and thank you.
Come back soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Everything you said is true.
In what way
Email? I think I had your email address because Doris forwarded something.
Oh, great. So if you drop an email, we are in touch.
Yeah, I will today. I'll just say hello and thank you, and then we'll have
Thank you.
what a safe travels in 2 weeks. But I mean, next week is what I really want to talk about. Do-overs. God saying, I think I made a mistake, I'm going to try again. Well, this is that would be wonderful.
Actually, it's the same language because the evil of man's heart is gathering fruit. I'm going to destroy them. Because of the evil of man's heart, I'm not ever going to destroy them again.
Yeah.
At the end of the story, really, is
Well, the question is, you raised an account of race. If you're writing this in the exile, in light of all of this, what is the purpose of the first 11 chapters? Why am I telling you all of this? I've been thinking a lot about this.
Oh, you? I didn't know you were going to be here.
No
And I
one
have
shows no compassion for these Abraham shows compassion for
Noah walks with God, Abraham walks with God.
No one does what he's told.
Yeah, I know.
I spoke about this last night in our Torah.
I know it well. I know it well. I love
Well, it raises the question if he's the only one who saves it.
He's got holiness, integration, integrity. And that's compassion. Part of the root. We can say it if we want to. Take care. By the way, you're coming back from Traviata? 2 weeks from last Wednesday.
I don't know if I will be back for Traviata, but it sounded fantastic. I certainly have. She's well, it's fading.
It is.
But the young woman who was singing it,
I'm here.
I'm gonna leave you two to talk.
Oh, no.
Sure, but before that, here.
Oh, are you going to the opera in Chicago?
Yes.
Oh, what are you going to hear?
We're going to hear the Rossini Ori. I mean, it's not the reason for going, but
Because I heard them and they're in Athens and Rome.
oh yeah, they're back.
They're back.
And Jeffrey's going to sing it.
Oh, lovely. Why not? Oh, what perfect. What perfect.
The second thing we're going to hear is Don Carlos.
Oh, that's right. I did
you
see that
see
on
it
the
here?
schedule. I saw it.
It was.
I saw it in New York.
It was. I saw it was the Met Encore last year.
Yeah. I saw it in New York. Oh, yeah, that long. I'm exhausted. Anyway.
The first act is for the French. So this is Don Carlos. Don Carlo is Italian, which doesn't have the first act.
Okay, I'll have to.
And the ending is a mess, isn't it? Where his grandfather pulls him into the house so that it's sort of a deus ex machina to save him. I think Verdi was very troubled by that ending. But it's just the grand prisoner scene.
Yes. I should remember the ending. Anyway. Yeah. I mean, it's been lovely for Rick. And nice to make contact with people, right?
And wonderful, as I said, to read somebody's work and then to know who they are.
Exactly.
Good.
Anyway, thank you.
Oh, of course, and thank you for yours.
Or later, someday. I know. Oh, that would be good. Yeah, I know. But the schools are coming because they have to. And that's because you got the adults on board. There's a lot that is unsuccessful. There's no one. They're free. I just don't
It's a big school discussion, of course, and it's a leader.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you want to
Torah Study, because one of these days. One of these days. Okay.
You might be right. I mean, how is it almost there? Madison, doesn't have the right to vote.
Maximization of the minimization of risk.
Understanding the law.
There's a,
I don't know what she is or what she's running for Congress. Have you been very helpful till just now? The TV ads have been pretty vitriolic, not just there, but everywhere.
show up.
elected official at the
Well,
moment.
before she was.
I think she's a county prosecutor in Silver County, and she's really.
Trash, and that whole idea,
We know how to close things. Can't be.
terrible, terrible.
What's happened as a result of having disputes divide a lot of
Yeah,
politicians have said, okay, well, I said, this is not what I signed up.
Right,
Really,
and it is.
Anyway,
socialism.
all I wanted to say was,
Which I belong on Thursday.
the wife is fortunate. What she has, what she does. Stuart is fortunate he's going to get the time.
Yeah.
She's on.
I know.
We're gonna be talking some more.
I'm the type of guy,
You can write some-
I sleep with. It's probably a rare How is it,
with
and this is not science, this is non-science. How
about
is
the
it
nature of implications.
George is doing?
The nature
of that form,
Yes. It's a particular form, you can give public implications.
Clearly.
To what extent do you set aside your own denominational as opposed to being allowed to touch
He's
on it? How do you measure
There's no,
it?
there's no
And
answer.
he is losing his
Secular
mind.
religious
Yeah,
nature.
well, there's no answer.
The whole
And my
line.
sister-in-law's
Is
from
there
LA,
anything
and
that you
she's,
could put together
Yeah,
like that?
so,
I don't know anything about it.
There's no answer.
Except I do know.
There's no more.
it's
answer
like
to
the
that.
other
It's
roof.
why
On the
we're-
other hand, there is no
An
other.
email,
Okay.
to speak out loud in response.
That would be great.
And in the meantime, if I can also, I have to come up
Can't get through
with
one.
some piece.
But to
that,
me, there's no more answer to that question.
I'm sure.
Then there is why we're here.
Rabbinical school or even any kind of theological.
I'll go with
school.
that.
How do you get an
It's like what George said when.
What are their do's and don'ts?
Yeah, he said, I
And
guess up a little above ground.
recently by a law.
Well, it's true of everybody here.
To his students.
And it's a miracle in itself. I didn't realize
It is, you should take it for granted.
Yeah.
Until you see stupid.
Yeah, right. I understand.
It's rabbinical
But I'm saying, I don't think there is.
Conduct a wedding.
We're not capable.
That's true. The implications,
We weren't
nobody
made.
ever said that. You know, when I was there, it was much more academic. And I think it is now. They're not really taking seriously how to be a rabbi. When I was there, the teachers were all PhD.
We're flawed.
Like I said, my colleagues, the reason they said not to do it is because they know the guy everybody's gonna do it.
Rabbi Klein.
Same thing you tell your children. Yeah, like, whatever you do, don't do that. You know full well, having said that, that's what they're gonna do. And partly because you said it.
The poetry session is not just,
Please give the wife.
the difference between.
Yeah, when you using the same, Gailey, you doing all right?
Kaylee is doing fine.
Go
And
on to the races.
I am amazed
But I mean,
she is underneath that smile. One tough. She gets.
She can recover.
I mean, I was moved to.
Oh, they are. I love that part. Oh, she was.
Well, I'm going to Barry.
Oh, you can play. If you don't know what next Saturday is.
We didn't know what this said.
That's what this is.
Keep going.
All right.
That's great.
I think I'll take a clock and make it for lunch. I can eat it on the clock.
Almost saying.
You do that.
Soon it will be us. We will be like. And that way, you know, you don't have to have a prayer, right? You could pray yourself.
No, thank you.
While everybody comes.
What are we hoping for?
Well, so if I get finished my story real fast, I got a third class. I stumbled onto a third class.
But she was the one shot. Heartbroken. She was really forgiving.
2 bar mitzvahs this year. All it did was help to pay, the other bar mitzvahs the week before Thanksgiving, and that all it's gonna do is pay for grandpa's
And
gift.
the whole high holy days.
That's a good thing.
I prayed that about 6.
As opposed to going to the piggy bank, you bet.
What do I have to do to avoid it? I may have to take a hike myself. Thank you, Rabbi.
Hey,
I will email you.
Email me and then I'll respond.
Thank you for.
Great. How's it going?
Good, so major aspirations to try and lead up to Abraham. I think it was a great idea.
It is a good idea.
But it's a lot easier when you can just lecture without having Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I toy with it, but that's not who we are.
There's a trade-off.
It is a trade-off, right. Because as Marco said, I mean, gosh, there's so much energy among all of us, and so many great,
so much wisdom.
That's a lot of wisdom, right?
I hope.
So two things. I got a question. So yes, so when Eve gave birth to Cain, she said like gave birth to a human with God. So was she being did she have hubris by saying that she's like God, or if we're created in the image of God, is that okay? And say, hey, I'm confirming this. So how do you look at her attitude on that?
Well, I'm looking a little bit from the perspective of how things turned out. She had boys who were at each other's throats, actually. They had different inclinations about sacrifice. Cain obviously was jealous of Abel. So I speculate that had something to do with how they were raised, parental favoritism.
Okay, well, let me say this then.
God favoritism.
Look at God.
I'm sorry?
God favoritism.
And God's favoritism.
God had Adam and Eve, and he told them just do one thing. Don't eat from that tree. Look what happened. So was he any better a parent than
We all became flawed characters.
God has well, look, I mean, I think you could say the same thing about both. Both roles are fraught. I mean, God wants obedience and some deference to God. Except God only knows who we are. And he knows he's not going to really get this. It's an aspiration for God. And parents only want the best for their children, but I had a psychologist friend many, many years ago who said, I'll never forget this phrase, the family is a child shredding machine.
That's an interesting approach.
So what is it that Adam and Eve can do? I mean, you raise two, my brother and I, you know, we traveled together and we spent a lot of time together, but the first many times we were together, it was just him saying to me how difficult it was that our parents favored I'm the firstborn and all that business. He and I are very much alike as human beings, and yet the birth order and the oldest comes somehow, opens the womb, and therefore there is a certain privilege that the parent, this son is regarded as. So what choice do they, God or Eve, have?
Okay.
Don't you think? I mean, if they lived happily ever after, we close the book. Who said that? Malcolm? Did Malcolm say that?
Boy, that would have been nice for all of us, though, huh?
Well, put them out of business on Saturday morning.
Exactly. What if Eve had said to the serpent, no?
Yeah.
That's the end of the story. We don't need Abraham at all. Jews, we don't need Jews.
We don't need Torah.
We don't need Torah. We don't need Torah study. I get to sleep in Saturday mornings.
Do you think Eden is a construct?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Oh, I do.
That's what I thought.
I think there's the idea here that it starts with perfection, and therefore perfection in a way is rationally aspired to. I mean, yeah. No,
You get the idea of the asymptote again, you know?
Right, there you go. Oh, that's very good. You approach the line, but you never get there. I was thinking about the formula for the asymptote the other night. It came up, X times Y